Next, we are going into the second of our fireside chats. So Glyn Roberts will be chatting to Rebecca Parsons, who's the CTO at ThoughtWorks, and they are going to be talking to us about tools for building alignment in engineering.
Hi, and welcome everyone to this fireside chat with Rebecca Parsons, where we will discuss ways of building inter and intra-team alignment in your engineering organisation. This session will be recorded, and please feel free to add any questions at any time in the chat section on your right. There will be a Q&A section at the end. So I'm Glyn Roberts and emceeing today's session, and I'm the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. It's a pleasure to be with today Rebecca Parsons, who is the CTO at ThoughtWorks. Welcome, Rebecca. Could you tell us something about you, please?
Thanks, Glyn. Good to be here. I am the Chief Technology Officer for ThoughtWorks. We are a software consulting company, which means I spend a lot of time going into other people's organizations and seeing how they are applying technology to solve their problems. And that's the experience I will be drawing on today and talking about the importance of technology alignment and how you can achieve it.
Excellent. So it's great to have you here, Rebecca. So let's talk about tools for building alignment. So to start with, I'd like to ask, what kinds of failures have you experienced with organizations' approach to building technical alignment?
Well, the big problem is in many, particularly more enterprise organizations, you have one group over here called the architects or the central architecture group. And they're the group that are making the technology decisions. They are choosing the technology stack. They're coming up with an approved list of tools and languages. And then you have this other group over here, and these are the development teams that are actually responsible for creating the software, and they are the users, if you will, of those tools. And where the technology alignment problem arises is where you've got the architects who think that the development teams are just going rogue, they're ignoring everything, they're being irresponsible, they're just not listening, and the development teams are looking to the architects and saying they're completely disconnected from my problem, they don't understand what it's like to actually use these tools, they're making it so much more difficult for me to deliver. And a lot of it is they have different perspectives on what the problems are that need to be addressed. Now, of course, this is different across different kinds of organizations. When you're a startup, what you really care about is, I need to get to market fast. I need to validate my business model. I need to start to get customers. When you get to the scale-up phase, people then start to say, oops, I don't really have the infrastructure, I don't have the foundation to scale by an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude, and now I have to some of these choices. How do I revisit that? Many startups also, they'll grab whatever they can because their goal is time to market, and so now you've got a proliferation potentially of technologies, and how do you go about making those choices about rationalizing that technology landscape? What's really important, and what should be the drivers? And those are the kinds of failures that you see, and a lot of it just comes down to a lack of communication, a lack of understanding in the groups making the technology choices and the groups, if you will, inheriting those choices and having to live with them.
Absolutely, I do see a lot of top-down approach management in my line of work, so that's a very common one for me. Okay, so what are the different approaches to take to solving these issues, and what should organizations be doing differently?
Well, in my experience, the big issue is this lack of understanding of what the motivation is. So when you look at the responsibility that the central architecture team has, they have a medium to long-term horizon. their objective is to maintain and enhance the enterprise value of the IT estate. When you look at the motivation of a delivery team, they're supposed to get stuff out fast. They need to continue to deliver value, and so their time horizon is very short to potentially medium term. And so what you need to do is bring the groups together so that the delivery teams can express, these are the things I need to do to deliver value to the business. And the architects can describe, this is the downside of having 6 different database stacks or 5 different programming languages, and et cetera. And we have a sort of structured workshop that we use. We called it the Build Your Own Technology Radar exercise. And it's based on the technology radar that ThoughtWorks publishes twice a year, which is really based on our experience on projects, our view of the technology landscape. And it has 4 quadrants: languages and frameworks, platforms, tools, and techniques, and then 4 rings, and the middle being adopt. This is something we think everybody really needs to be doing. The trial ring, where this really is ready for prime time if you want to go ahead and do it. There's an assess ring, which is, boy, this looks interesting. Maybe we ought to keep an eye on it. And then the outer ring is hold. So this is proceed with caution. When we do these exercises, we often rename that outer ring to retire, because very often organizations have technologies that they feel like they're okay, you're past your shelf life. And so what we do in this workshop is facilitate that conversation. What are the technologies that are currently in use within the organization? And how well are those working? How well are they achieving the objectives that the architects had in mind for that tool when they selected it? How well is it serving the needs of the delivery teams? And when you start to have those discussions, all of a sudden, the developers say, oh, well, wait a minute, it's not that these architects are crazy. They're just thinking about different problems than I am. And when you can start to get that specific alignment on the radar, but actually more importantly, an alignment of why those particular choices were made. What is wrong with one particular choice? Why is this one so important? That provides the information to the delivery teams. So when they really are faced with something that, it would really help a lot if I could use a graph database for this, because this is just an inherently graph problem. What is it that the architects are concerned about in some of these things? Let's make sure that the tool I'm choosing has good backup capabilities and good monitoring, or whatever it is that the architecture team needs. So, and the architecture team also can understand these are the kinds of problems that the development teams are experiencing right now, and how can I incorporate that into my decision making around tool selection. And so, although the artifact at the end, the radar is important, and I'll talk a little bit about governance in a minute. For alignment purposes, it's the discussion that's important. It's getting the development teams and the architects into the same room and understanding the problems. Now, where the artifact itself is really useful, and we find this in particular more in the scale-up category of enterprises, is as a way for architectural governance around experiments. And so we use that assess ring as something to represent, these are things we think we should experiment with to see whether they will be useful for us. But you want to put effectively a WIP limit on how many experiments that you're running. And so you can use that assess ring as a governance tool to say, okay, we're reevaluating the radar, team A over here, you were experimenting this. How'd the experiment go? Is this something that we should put into our trial or adopt ring, or is this something that we need to kick out? And then we can put in another experiment. And so it's a way of actually governing some of these technology choices in a very visual way. But you can't make that visual unless you have those conversations. And that's really what we found to be so effective at building technology alignment.
I mean, absolutely. The technology radar I haven't heard about until recently, so it's really interesting to read about it. And I've definitely seen organizations with a single developer go straight from the hold to adopt process in a week by themselves with no conversation with anyone else in the organization. And now suddenly it's a DevOps problem to support. They leave, and then there's no one that understands that technology. So absolutely, this conversation piece does seem to make a lot of sense to make sure that the right people are part of this discussion. So why do approaches like this work, have you found?
The first thing is that mutual understanding, where the developers no longer see the architects as these evil overlords who are trying to make their lives miserable, and the architects no longer see the developers as these cowboys that are just running around, causing all kinds of havoc and being irresponsible and all of that. You bring the groups together, and they understand each other's motivation. They still might not agree, but at least they understand more of the whys. Okay, there is value in limiting the scope of languages, because if you've got a large enterprise, being able to move people around different projects, not having to worry about highly specialized skills, that is a more efficient thing to do. Okay, and now the development teams can understand, well, this is why they've given us this set of languages, but it also then allows me to potentially say, this is why I might need an exception to this, because I have got this particular kind of problem, and this is the value that it's going to bring to the overall organization, and here's how it stacks up against the criteria that you've set up for what constitutes a good language. So that conversation and the at least visibility and alignment of principles is the most important factor for making this successful. I think another part of it, though, is by doing this deliberately, we're going to set aside some time to bring these groups together and have this discussion. You can start to explore options that might not have occurred to anybody before. You have people who have frontline experience dealing with the products and services that the organization delivers, and you've got people with experience in trying to make sure that estate continues to serve the needs of the business. You bring them together, and so we also start to see some interesting innovations coming out from these discussions. When you carve out the space, we are going to talk about what our technology landscape is. And very often, good ideas come out of that wouldn't have happened otherwise, simply because you're bringing people together for that conversation. Historically, developers and architects have always, kind of been at loggerheads with each other. And this process of bringing the groups together makes it a much more collaborative effort than it is in many organizations.
Okay, great. So a bit ahead. I've still got a couple more questions, but we're already getting audience questions. So let's kick off with some of them while we have them. So from Caslin, isn't the fact that we have an architecture silo and a developer's silo part of the problem?
It is. And in an ideal world, we wouldn't have those kinds of silos. This is, in fact, one of the first steps that I found as an effective way to start to break down that architecture silo. Many people will say, agile software development is anti-architecture, and that is completely untrue. But the way many architecture organizations right now are structured within companies, they have to be a silo. They're not properly resourced. The poor architects are vastly outnumbered. And so they end up dictating through documents from their silo because they have no choice. and this kind of technology alignment really is the first step in helping organizations understand that doing architecture well is actually a top line revenue thing. It's not just a cost center. And once you get an organization thinking something can contribute to the top line, you can start to get the level of investment. You can break down those silos and have a much more collaborative and cross-functional approach to the problem. So it is a first step.
Okay, great. Okay, so how would you go about measuring success when you're trying to build alignment?
First off, I would say how often that alignment is respected. In many top-down driven architecture organizations, what you see is that the developers just ignore what the architects tell them. And you might not notice that. There are some that it's really hard to ignore, but for the most part, it's like, okay, well, yes, you can say that, but I'm just not going to pay attention to you. So that's one measure is are people actually doing what they say they're supposed to do? Particularly if you have an artifact like this radar and this width limit on the experiments, the vitality of those experiments is another measure. And notice I didn't say successful experiments, because I actually think innovation programs whose metric is how many ideas actually make it into production, that's the wrong metric, because you're not taking enough risk if you're always only doing experiments that succeed. And so, it's really more the number of experiments that have gone to conclusion, not necessarily the number of experiments that have succeeded. And then also just how many people are actually talking about the artifact, how many people are engaged in the conversation about why are these things where they are. That usually means that people are really bought into the decision that was the result of the alignment.
Okay, great. So another one from the audience, from Simon. How do you feel about the Netflix concept of the paved road for enabling organic experimentation and the mediocrity of new ideas?
I think that's an excellent way of looking at it. And there are other organizations who do something similar. If you've got an internal platform team, in my opinion, that platform team should not be able to mandate the use of the platform. And that platform team should be measured on basically the equivalent of the Net Promoter Score within the development team. One of the things I like about this approach is you say, okay, if you do it my way, it's nice and easy, it's nice and smooth. That's why they call it the paved road. If you want to do something else, these are the things that you have to satisfy to get onto the platform. It might be around data protection or security or logging or monitoring, things of that nature. If you use the paved road, you don't have to do any of those things. If you want to do something else, you have to do all of these things to be able to play on the platform. And what I think is the value of that is it doesn't assess a cost to going off the platform, but it also again reinforces the principles of what are the things that are important. Why are we doing these things on the platform in the way we are?
Okay, great. We're now coming to the end. So there's 1 minute left, so I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question. We're going to go for Maxim's one. Many engineers see architects as redundant. What are the best ways to address engineers' concern beyond just demonstrating practically the value of an architect? If we keep the answer really short, please, that'd be great.
Yep. And I would say that the key is for the architect to be articulating what are the things that are keeping me up at night, and working with the engineers to do whatever is necessary to address that. So things like resiliency or mean time to recovery, those are the things that architects care about. And the engineers, once they see these are the things I care about, they can work together on how to achieve those objectives.
Fantastic. Okay, then I could talk for hours about this. So thank you, Rebecca, for talking with us today. Sorry our time is so short. You can connect with Rebecca and me after the session on social media. We'll be sharing the link shortly. Thank you all for joining.